Every contract tells two stories, one that is written in ink and one that is written in numbers. And when those numbers don't match the promises, something deeper starts to happen. Not in the law first, but in equity. That's where we enter the realm of unjust enrichment. That's the moment when the system must answer for what it gained and what it failed to deliver. Now, you could fulfill your promise perfectly and still end up paying more than you should, paying twice, or paying for errors that you didn't create. Now, that's when equity stands in. When we talk about the balancing of things, equity asks one question, and that question is, did someone benefit unfairly from your performance? Now, thank you for watching this video. If you're brand new, hit the subscribe button. Number 2, hit the like button. All right? If you hit the like button, this pushes content like this on the algorithm, and you would inherently be helping others. And number 3, this is not legal advice. This is not financial advice. This is for educational purposes only. Everything that you hear here today is just to really spark interest, to spark some level of action so that you can be able to go and do the due diligence on your own, so that you can become more comfortable and know that this information is available. It's possible to do anything in regards to negotiate your debt contracts, challenge and use private banking strategies, do coupon remittance, use negotiable instruments, challenge debt collectors, challenge charge-offs. So my object for today is to teach you guys exactly what unjust enrichment means, really give you guys a full deep dive breakdown of unjust enrichment so that you guys can understand how to properly use it in a court sense. All right? Now, thank y'all for watching the video. We got a lot to talk about. Make sure you stick all the way to the end. Let's dive into another one. Unjust enrichment occurs when one party receives a benefit that they shouldn't keep, especially when that benefit comes from your mistake, their mistake, or a breakdown in performance. So here are some of the key elements that will show you that there is some level of unjust enrichment. That element is a benefit was received, whether it was money, it came at your expense, and keeping it would be unfair. So some of the examples will be a duplicate charge. Some examples will be a misapplied payment, unexplained fees, servicing errors, force placed on insurance, escrow mistakes, okay, balance calculation mistakes. When you think of equity, it doesn't punish, it creates balance. And when you think of a debt collector that charges off your debt, and then after they charge off your debt, they're able to write that debt off. They don't have much of a risk, but then also at the same time, they sell your debt off to someone else, and then they attempt to collect on the debt. Now, in this case, it's very simple. All you have to do is challenge that debt collector who they sold your data and information to. That's a very simple challenge. If there is a collection agency reaching out to you, that's an easy battle because they more likely don't have the rights to the debt. They just bought your information and attempting to get money out of you. But when they send a letter and you don't respond, or when they send a letter, they are attempting to send you an offer to create a contract. And unless you deny or reject that offer, then a contract is formed. And at that point, if it goes on too long, then a collection agency may have grounds to collect. Okay? So typically when you get in a situation where the debt collector is reaching out to you and they now in some element, shape, or form have authority to collect, and this is rare, it's because like you pretty much position yourself to where you ignored them, and agreed because you were silent. So I always tell people to always respond back. Even if it's nonsense, respond back and try to get to a point where you can conclude it and remedy it privately. All right. So you wouldn't necessarily need to use unjust enrichment, you can use unjust enrichment in this case, but unjust enrichment is something to make your defense much stronger. Okay. So when performance fails, equity activates. Failure of performance triggers equity. Okay, so here's how it will play out. You performed, you paid, you complied, you did your part. And in other words, your performance could be that initial negotiable instrument, that promissory note. You could argue that. Economically, the economic reality, you already performed, but obviously in the courtroom, this won't necessarily hold up. And I'll do a separate video talking about, how to properly use this in the courtroom. Because you couldn't just go out there and scream unjust enrichment, and that can be your primary line of defense. It's only a second line of defense that would enhance your argument, okay? So you can also say that performance, you sending letters, you disputing a claim, you disputing the contract, is you performing as well. And when you send them a letter, they must perform properly, okay? Another thing that they'll do where they do not perform properly is do things like miscalculate fees. They'll do things like add charges incorrectly. They'll do things like transfer their servicing without notice. And transferring service without notice is very common, okay? And also, they fail to credit your payment. All of these things, it happens, right? And when they do this, if they benefit in some way, shape, or form, and this is just on a simple level, they benefit from something unfairly, that right there is unjust enrichment. Meaning they collected more than they should have, or kept money after their errors, or gained from a misrepresentation, okay? So equity responds not by canceling the contract, but by correcting the imbalance. This is where lawful leverage lives, not accusation and demonstration, okay? So here's some real world examples of unjust enrichment. Some common scenarios of unjust enrichment where it becomes evident is duplicate payment posting, right? You pay once and the ledger counts it twice. If you stay silent, they'll end up keeping the benefit. So if you get in a place where you get these unexplained fees, always call them out on it, all right? Incorrect escrow calculations, late fees from their mistakes, okay? There's situations where maybe the pay now button doesn't work and now you got a late fee because of something on their end, okay? You get force placed on insurance, often overpriced, unnecessary, right? The balance jumps without explanation. These are the things that essentially put you in a position of being able to create a paper trail of things errors that they have not corrected and continue to collect. And this is just on a baseline level. When they benefit off of your demise, that will be considered unjust enrichment, a violation of equity. It wouldn't be equitable. It wouldn't be an equitable partnership. Okay? So I also want to talk about how to identify unjust enrichment. Okay? You can use this simple audit, right? You can compare your statements over time. You can match performance to contract terms. You can verify posting accuracy. You can document every discrepancy. Okay? Screenshots, date it, right? A sentence describing it, right? Putting this in your evidence binder, right? And I typically tell people that watch me to based on your cases to build up an evidence binder per case, all right? Or have one big binder that's organized based on the cases that you're dealing with, okay? The reason why unjust enrichment is so powerful, okay, is because the courts care deeply about enrichment, right? It's objective, it's document based, it's equity driven, it's measurable, and it's provable. You can prove that a company has unjustly enriched themselves, okay? You're not arguing a banking theory when it comes to unjust enrichment. You are showing numbers, dates, ledgers, statements, okay? Equity responds to imbalance, not a noise, all right? This video is sponsored by the Fund Yourself Academy. My step-by-step system designed to help you fix your credit, get funding, and build real financial freedom from scratch. If you're tired of feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or just ready to stop living paycheck to paycheck, this is where it changes. Inside the Academy, I break down everything from consumer law secrets that they don't teach in school to how to remove negative items and boost your score, get access to business funding, and start building multiple income streams online. Whether you're just starting out or ready to level up your game and get the bag, this is your playbook. We've got tools, templates, dispute letters, mentorship calls, private community access, and an exact roadmap I use to leave my 9 to 5 and create time freedom. But only for a limited time. You can get access to the Fund Yourself Academy on a free trial basis for the next 7 days. And then after that, you pay less than $1 a day at $27 a month if you like it. No fluff, just facts and just freedom. Go to the fundyourselfacademy.com or hit the link in the description to join now, because nobody's coming to save you, but you can fund yourself. So I want to pull up some laws real quick, specifically the laws that back up unjust enrichment. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go to California Civil Code 3517, where it essentially says no one can take advantage of their wrong. Okay. And the reason why I want to show you guys the law, just to show you guys that unjust enrichment is not a theory. Okay. It is an actual strategy. It's actually a legal understanding that the courts will honor. What's important is arguing in a way that a court will actually honor. Okay. And unjust enrichment is one of the oldest principles when it comes to contract law. All right. So California Civil Code 3517. This is the heart of equity. Okay, if a lender benefits from an error or gains from a miscalculation or keeps the money that wasn't properly owed, equity will not allow them to retain that benefit. Okay, you are not challenging the contract, you are challenging an unfair gain. Then we dive into the restatement, third of restitution, where it talks about unjust enrichment. All right, the restatement used a nationwide guide. The restatement is used as a nationwide guide to equity. Okay. So obviously, if you want to understand equity more, you want to go to the restatements. All right, there's the restatement, the second restatement, first. You get what I'm saying? So a person who unjustly is enriched at the expense of another is subject to liability and restitution. Okay, what is restitution? To restore. All right. In plain English, if they gained, you lost, and the gain wasn't justified, meaning it has to have a proper justification, they may owe restitution. So if you challenge a person, let's just use a case of a repossession. I think that's very simple to break down. If they repossess the vehicle after you have done things like sent a validation letter, challenging them on the repossession, not only could that be an unlawful repossession, but that would be them unjustly enriching themselves, because when you ask them to perform and provide validation and they do not do that and they continue to do something wrong to you, that would be considered unjust enrichment. It also makes me think, is unjust enrichment can also be used as an argument against credit bureaus, because credit bureaus make money off of your information. So if they are reporting negative information at your demise and you don't even have a contract with them, not only are they violating your privacy, but they will be unjustly enriching themselves for their wrongdoings. Okay, so make sure you guys are understanding this element, because when you do send letters to credit bureaus, most of this stuff applies. Okay, the reason why I even dived into debt discharge, the reason why I even dived into how deep consumer law is, was to position my credit, was to be able to beat credit bureaus. Okay, and it just got to the point where now we are in the element of talking about debt discharge. But everything that I teach you can be used for credit bureaus, and I would implore you to do it. Okay, another thing I want to give you guys is a couple of cases that enforce unjust enrichment. Okay, we pretty much made it simple and gave us a better understanding of unjust enrichment. So the first thing I want to talk about is Balden versus Green Tree Servicing LLC. Okay, now in this particular case, Balden used unjust enrichment as like the primary source for this case, and obviously it got dismissed because it was the primary source. And it begs the question, okay, well, obviously the economic reality is the fact that a company will double dip. They'll make money, or whether it was charged off, whether it was insurance payout, securitization, whatever the case may be. You challenge the fact that they're trying to get extra money. You use that as your first claim of unjust enrichment. And most times, especially if you do that, I'll just say that it is unfair in the economic reality of things. Like, that is what's happening in the reality, but the courts don't see it that way. The courts see credit extension as consideration. okay, as lawful consideration. So you couldn't move, I'm sorry, y'all, it's a plane going over. As soon as I start to get deep, you couldn't necessarily use unjust enrichment as your primary argument, but you can use that as a secondary argument to truly drive the point of how you feel the need to challenge the contract, okay? But the reason why this case works for this video is specifically, obviously if you want to learn more about this, tap in and look up Balden versus Green Tree Servicing, okay? If y'all want me to do a deeper breakdown into some of these case laws, I will, all right? But this case works because it involves a loan servicer in a debt collection activity, okay? And if you really think about this as more of like the real world example, okay? Unjust enrichment being recognized in a debt situation, right? In that case, the borrower showed the payments were misapplied and the fees were added incorrectly, which is a classic performance issue, okay? The court agreed that if a company collects money it shouldn't have collected or benefits from its own servicing errors, that's not contract law anymore. That's unjust enrichment. And this is explained in the case itself, okay? Really to pretty much correct Balden because that was his initial claim, all right? But they did affirm that if a bank or a company does something wrong, then they will allow that to be used in the argument, okay? So in this case, the judge allowed the claim to go forward because equity won't let any party keep a benefit it didn't earn, okay? That's the correct lawful angle, not arguing the debt isn't real, but proving the numbers don't match the promises, okay? The reason why they threw it out is because, or I guess on the speaking the element of, before you dive into using unjust enrichment, you have to, and also affirm that in the contract itself, right? There are certain stipulations that certain things that you must do before it goes to equity. Equity is more of like, if the contract doesn't answer it, then we dive into equity. Until you have exhausted everything that the contract law allows you to do, you can't go to equity. If it isn't solved by the end, right, when it comes to contract law, then you go to equity, you know? So to really give you just leverage in your documentation, leverage in your argument, leverage in how you have felt more harm, okay? So what the judge essentially saying is, if there is a contract, use the contract to challenge errors. In other words, use contract law first to challenge the errors. Use the UCC, use consumer law first to challenge the errors. And if the contract doesn't cover the issue, then you dive into unjust enrichment. So obviously, when you get to the point where they are not providing proper disclosures and things of that nature, then we can start to truly dive into equity, okay? So courts only reach equity when the contract doesn't answer the problem. So your strength is in documenting performance, catching inconsistencies, identifying misapplied payments, and proving errors in accounting. That's what the material courts respond to. They respond to when those errors create a benefit the creditor shouldn't keep, okay? Then you use equity. So you have to be strategic. This is why it's important to understand how to challenge them using debt validation. This is why the premise of my content speaks about being able to use these using very legalistic items to be able to win versus me going down the rabbit hole talking about spirituality, talking about, element of, I can get emotional behind the camera, but I really enforce you guys to learn it so that you aren't emotional. You know what I mean? So you're not in there screaming, they never lent me money, because the reality is that argument doesn't work in court, unfortunately. Another question I have is, okay, a person may say, well, damn, if they double dip, if they make extra money off of me, like that is wrong, right? I'm watching it happen, and if we go to court, they act like this. None of that is true. And that's because the truth is that there is the economic truth is what I talk about on my channel, right? My goal is to teach you guys the economic truth, because becoming aware of what is around you helps you to detach from it, okay? Because we're attached to debt, we're attached to money, we're attached to, certain failures or our credit score, whatever the case may be. But that's because you don't know the economic reality of things, okay? So I'm giving you guys the economic truth, the economic reality. Yes, the banks don't lend their own money. They extend credit by booking an asset and a liability on their balance sheet, okay? Fractional reserve banking is real. Credit creation is real, okay? Securitization creates a risk transfer system, meaning that they're not actually risking their own money. Yes, I get that. The originator often sells or assigns the notes. Investors take on the risk. Servicers collect, and banks' risk is often minimal after their sale. Okay? Charge-offs are accounting events and not real losses. A bank can charge off, take tax benefit, and still sell the right to collect the same debt. The whole machine is built on risk that isn't a risk in a traditional sense. So, yes, you are correct in the element of they're not really putting skin in the game the way the public thinks. This is the real economic backstage truth, okay? The forbidden truth that they won't tell you. That's the reality. Yes, they are taking their own money. But here's the legal truth, because there is the economic truth and there is the legal truth. What courts will actually recognize as an enforceable argument. Because, like I said, there could be the reality and illusion can happen at the same time. Okay? You have to play the game how the game wants to be played. We can agree, yes. It is a simple unjust enrichment claim, given the fact that if you make money, not only at the inception of the agreement, but multiple times after the fact, and then you attempt to collect the debt for months after, yes, that would be unjust enrichment. But the reality is that in court, you can't just initially challenge with unjust enrichment because it is starting with equity first, okay? You challenge things like, you go in a way where you'll say banks didn't lend me money, or securitization removes the obligation, thinking that they are valid defenses, but the court won't treat it as that, unfortunately, okay? Because the courts will treat any extension of credit like a lawful consideration. Credit issued equals promise fulfilled. Assignment equals lawful transfer. Servicing equals lawful administration. The system is built to protect the flow of commerce, not expose its machinery behind it, which is why some people may look at this and say, well, damn, it's a means to no end. But no, that's not the case. It's just that it is going to be much, I'm telling you this, it is going to be much harder to challenge certain things, given the fact that they do not want to reveal what is essentially making all of United States money, okay? But it does not mean that it's useless. It means you can't use securitization to avoid a debt, but you can use securitization to demand proof of ownership and the accuracy of the claim, right? You can't force them to admit that we risked our own money, but you can force them to prove that they own the account. You can force them to prove that they have standing, that the balance is accurate, that assignments were lawful. They file a 1099 that enforces that they have transferred it. Okay, so let me see the assignment transfer and see that you still have authority to collect. You know what I mean? It's an opportunity that is created. Okay, we know, like, the reality is yes, they are doing something unfair. Okay, but what I'm trying to tell to you is that you couldn't really use it being unfair as a unfair enrichment as your primary argument. And I've said that so many times in this video, and y'all are probably annoyed by that, okay? But I'll do a separate video pretty much diving into this, really doing a deep dive into that, okay? I don't want to this video is already coming up to 30 minutes, so let me just go ahead and wrap up, and I'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit more in another video, okay? But I want to just emphasize the illusion and the reality happens at the same time, okay? You got to treat this like a lucid dream, okay? Like, yes, the dream is a dream, but you can let the dream happen to you, or you can start to work the dream, control the dream, you know? Another case law that I want to show you guys, and I won't go through it today because we don't have time, but Johnson versus Home State Bank. Okay. For this one in particular, the court allowed unjust enrichment to proceed because the contract didn't cover the disputed fees. The servicer obtained money it shouldn't have, and equity could fill the gap. So when the contractual remedies are incomplete, equity activates. All right. So don't chase loopholes, chase accuracy. When you start to send things like conditional acceptance, debt validation, all you're doing is asking for clarity. When they fail to give clarity, then that's when now we are pretty much building a case of not only unjust enrichment, but them, not complying to their duty and obligation as a collector, them not doing their duty as a servicer, right? Them not doing their duty as a bank who should be transparent, right? Them not doing their duty when it comes to accounting. All of this is what is primarily going to be your strongest argument. And then everything else, like unjust enrichment and the contract foundation, is just going to enhance your argument. And obviously, if it gets to a point where maybe they're able to show all this documentation, right? This is when you can start to get creative, right? You start to come up with a narrative that makes your argument, valid, all right? Or invalidates their claims, all right? But I'll come back to that. There's so much I can talk about when it comes to unjust enrichment. I'm going to try to just break this up. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you guys can be able to stay up to date when I do drop a video, because there are some topics in the middle of my video I'll be realizing I just don't have enough time to talk about it. So we'll do that in the next video. So this is what I want to leave you guys with. Okay. Remedy is not a revolt. All right. When you are discharging debt, when you are challenging a company, you are just moving and governing yourself properly. Okay. You should challenge anybody who gives you misinformation. Okay. You should be calm. Okay. You should be focused on the facts. Deal in facts. Be organized. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? Structure. Consistent. Right? Consistently send a letter if you're going through an argument. Okay. And if you stop the consistency, be accountable. You don't win by attacking, you win by documenting. So obviously, if you get in a case where they are not responding or whatever the case may be, you document that. You are building a case of non-compliance. You're building a case of unjust enrichment. You're building a case of them moving in a unlawful sense, violating commerce in itself. Okay. And then the psychology of remedy. And the reason why I tell people these topics that I talk about on this channel is because if you now know that you can challenge debt, right? There are people who reach out to me and say, well, I have this debt, it was willed down to me and I don't want to pay it. I'm stressed about it, or dang, I don't know what I'm gonna do, or blah, blah, blah. This is why you want to learn how to be able to get your own remedies so that you can have a peace of mind, so that you can feel in control, so that you can have a little bit more confidence, order, and be able to protect yourself, right? When you have that peace of mind, don't you feel like you can attack anything? Okay. Remedy is the bridge between knowledge and freedom. When your evidence becomes action, your structure becomes power. All right. We're running out of time. All right. My goal behind this series is to position you guys to help you guys understand the foundations of contracts, because when it comes to debts, you're challenging a contract. All right. So if you understand how to communicate with, a contract, you can pretty much win against any debt. All right. Or at least be able to negotiate and settle and position yourself so that you're not trapped by debt. All right. So thank y'all for watching this video. Remember to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? I don't know why I'm ad-libbing. I just keep ad-libbing my, what would they say, intrusive thoughts keep popping up. But tap into the school. All right. It's $27 until Black Friday. Tap in. And lastly, go watch this video. All right. No, not this video. This video. Watch this video. If you haven't already. That was episode 4. And this was the next video to that video. So watch this video right here. I love y'all.